Experts. Experts. I'm gonna I'm gonna say this about experts in mental health. Doesn't matter who it is. As soon as somebody thinks they know anything, they think they're an expert, and they don't know how to help anybody. The key really is staying curious. And the people I've looked to in mental health, it didn't take me long to look to world experts. And when I say world experts, I mean people who are famous in an area like mental health, like speaking. There's people who talk about improving how to speak. And so it was world experts in speaking I look to. And so now I'm gonna be hard, especially on experts, people who think they know. One group I don't know how to prepare anybody. So I'm gonna pick on religious types. And I want to pick on everybody. Religious types have told me I just gotta go to church. I just got to read the Bible. I couldn't read. How could I read if I didn't know my name? How could I read the Bible if I don't know my date of birth? And nobody could explain why. And that requires understanding why I couldn't read. Simply requires staying curious. Now I've since recovered, healed of reading, but expecting me to do anything when I literally walked in circles talking to myself is well, that's crazy in itself. It's crazy to expect somebody who's crazy to do anything when so other groups I'm gonna blame. Family. Any family. Doesn't matter who. I have a brother who thinks he knows anything about mental health. So he's quick to blame me because I just had to do what he says. If I just listened to him, all my problems would go away. That's the problem with experts. My brother thinks he's an expert because he thinks he struggled with mental health, then he knows what I need. And it's not just my brother. Now my sister, she knows she doesn't know anything. I feel my sister really has struggled, and she knows that she doesn't know how to help me. However, my brother thinks he's an expert. He thinks he knows everything I need. I just got to listen to him. If I just did what he did, all my problems would go away. Same with people who've been saved by God or the church, or they think if I just do what they did, if I just went to church like they did, all my problems would go away. And it's the same with therapists who go to school. Anybody who goes to school thinks they know how to help. One large double?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Therapists go to school, they think they know everything. They think they're experts. Most people regard them as experts. World experts who people I regard.
Thank you.
The people I regard as world experts are people who they know. They've spent countless hours, often their career, trying to find solutions. And they know they don't know how to help. If there's one thing they know, is they don't know. Some of those experts include David Rosenhan. Comment below if you know who David Rosenhan is. The Rosenhan experiment, 72, 73 or so. He did an experiment from Stanford University. He theorized that he doesn't know how to help anybody. So his experiment had volunteers go into psych wards, and the doctors did not know that Rosenhan and his volunteers were sane. The patients in the psych ward knew Rosenhan was an imposter. The patients knew Rosenhan was a fake. The patients could tell who needed help and who didn't. So then they set a famous teaching hospital, found out about this, and they had famous teaching hospital had Rosenhan do another experiment. Said, we got this, we know what we're doing, we're gonna pick out your actors. Rosenhan agreed to the second experiment. He hadn't sent anybody. And the famous teaching hospital turned away 40 people asking for help. Besides Rosenhan, comment if you know who Rosenhan is and his experiments or any parts thereof. Just because I studied Rosenhan doesn't mean I know anything about the subject. I just know the little bit I know. Maybe you know something I don't. Important to stay curious. Seems important. So, seems it might be important to study other experts, world experts, who know they don't know. Like Thomas Insel, leader of National Institute of Mental Health. Thomas Insel. He they have many meetings. One of them, he suggested that they should start a group to improve diagnostic testing and treatment of severe illness, and everybody applauded. Everybody that was there agreed. So there seems to be an understanding that they don't know. Thomas, a leader, knew, and he said and did something about it. Other experts, comment below if I don't remember Thomas's book. I'm sure Rosenhan has books on the subject. I'd love to read a book. I still can't read books. Yeah, I can read some stuff, not everything. And at one point, 2022, I was able to read books, but now I can't. And before I became severely ill, I used to love to read books. And now I can't, and I can't get therapists to help me heal to read books. So, besides Thomas Insel, I want to say Frank Ochberg. Frank Ochberg is the founding father of trauma science. He's dedicated his life to trying to find solutions, and spent all his time so Ochberg, in a video he talks about Thomas Insel. He talks about other people because he studied other people trying to find different answers. And Frank Ochberg talks about the future of therapy. The future of therapy. He says, in the future, the way I understand it, the way I'm going to relay it, is in the future, therapists will come out of school. This is the way I understand it. Therapists will come out of school only able to treat one specific group of trauma injuries. The way I understand that means currently we have general practicing therapists who might lean towards a specific area. But the way I understand Ochberg is OCHBERG is that now I forget what I was gonna say. General practicing therapists and experts in specific fields. I was gonna say, it sounds like Ochberg is saying that he knows the brain is so complex, it's impossible for anybody to know anything about one area of the brain. That it should not be generalized, that it should be specific groups of injuries should be given to people who've studied just that. However, also important, it might be extremely important, is Ochberg also talks about, 2 points on Ochberg. One is he coined Stockholm Syndrome, sometimes called battered wife syndrome, sometimes called parental alienation syndrome, though it's all rooted in Stockholm Syndrome, which was coined by Ochberg. Another thing Ochberg did is, it sounds like there was a team of experts who, I don't know, Ochberg was part of the team of experts who named PTSD about 45 years ago. And what's important is, the other thing that's important is about 12 years ago, 13 years ago or so, Ochberg, other experts like Jonathan Shay, I'll get to in a minute, experts like Jonathan Shay encouraged Ochberg to convince the world that it should be called an injury. So they've been working to change the name from PTSD to PTSI to recognize the injury that leads to the post-traumatic stress. So now 12 years or more or so, Ochberg and his friends have been calling it PTSI, and they're working, again I would say tirelessly, past retirement. They're constantly working to change, to encourage the world to call it PTSI. So because here's an important point. One reason I would say Ochberg is a world expert is because he can admit he was wrong about PTSD. And he's willing to change his work. To admit he was wrong. So, to me, that says a lot about experts. People who think they're experts insist they're right. People who are actually experts, not always, but I think one component to make somebody an actual expert, maybe on their way to becoming an expert, is admitting, knowing that they don't know. So another world expert is Jonathan Shay. He's working into retirement. Shay is working into retirement, and he spent his career helping Vietnam vets, and he knew he didn't know how to help, so he says he's got degrees up one arm and down the other. And he says the only thing that helps veterans heal is peer support groups. So when he realized he didn't know how to help, he went and got more education and more education and more education, and none of it, he says none of it, nothing he learned can help anybody. The reason I say it can't help anybody is, Shay says it differently. The way I would explain it is, if something he learned helped the general population, and any injury chances are is it might help veterans. Nothing he learned helps veterans. Chances are none of that helps anybody. Aside from mental health, I would say another expert, still applicable in mental health because it's how we communicate. And I would say that's Chris Voss. Chris Voss made mistakes in communication as when he was he's now retired, former FBI hostage and chief international hostage negotiator. So the skills he learned, made mistakes, went out and found more and more information, and and when he says he's made mistakes, so they went back to school, went and got different information, and now here's the thing. He says in recent years they're discovering that really it's all about rooted in neurology. And I agree. It seems the test is, the pushback is testing our ideas and against the survival brain. One way to explain that is Chris says people want to say no because it protects us. So to ask no-oriented questions. And I can summarize that by something I learned: conflicting information in business. In business school, I learned when I cold call somebody on the phone and is to ask if now is a bad time to talk. And on other subjects, I was told to ask yes-oriented questions. Chris teaches to use no-oriented questions for everything. Because people feel safe saying no. People want to say no. And here's more on making those cold calls. I realized in business I didn't know. Studying Chris Voss, I learned, and I see that when I ask somebody no-oriented questions, like on the phone, an example is now is a bad time to talk. People are quick to tell me, no, this is a bad time, call me back in 2 days, or in 2 hours, or in 2 months. Usually not 2 months, but I mean 2 weeks. People know that, like, if it's a stranger I've never talked to before, they might say 2 hours. They might say 2 minutes. Because they're in the middle of doing something. And so I take that as before they answer, they already know if this is a bad time to answer. It's like people just do it out of respect or so. Just because somebody answered doesn't mean it's a good time, and they know if it's a bad time, even though they've answered. It might be an emergency. But anyway, so other experts besides Chris Voss, I'm gonna say there's other experts I'm sure I haven't yet learned of, and some of the experts I've studied don't come to mind right now. And world experts, people who know they don't know anything. So other experts I have studied do come to mind are leaders in in mental health, specifically war veterans, soldiers, specifically shell shock. And as a military vet, or soldier, I was vet. I was quick to to look to shell shock. What I found is many people today say that shell shock, that PTSD used to be called shell shock. What I found is it never was. PTSD was never called shell shock. Instead, PTSD used to be called neurasthenia. It seems clear, it was well documented that officers during World War I were more prone to neurasthenia, PTSD symptoms. And it seems there was a clear difference in PTSD symptoms and shell shock symptoms. In the sense that shell shock seems to shut down different parts of the brain. Like amnesia, like paralysis, temporary and partial paralysis, or complete paralysis, and temporary, not all usually, and it might be couple days, couple weeks, couple months, couple years, and not just paralysis, blindness, temporarily blind. Incontinence, muteness, deafness, incontinent, amnesic, and complete or partial. So some soldiers' paralysis would be stiffer than concrete. One sergeant had a paralyzed trigger finger. He could move his entire body except his brain shut down his trigger finger. One soldier was deaf except for one word. He only heard one word. His brain allowed him to hear the word bomb. So and the same with blindness. It's well documented. It's well documented that there's people who are different levels of partially blind, and soldiers who were completely blind, healed to see, recovered. So some of those names: Charles Samuel Myers. He was leading a team of experts. There's another name. His boss, I can't remember his boss's name. Both of them were doctors, medical doctors. And besides his boss, there was some of the things they did to treat severe illness. Things like electroshock therapy, hypnosis, and at the time they called it talk therapy. And there's different forms of talk therapy. One is, at the time, and it was initially called Arthur Hurst's Miracle Talking Cure. Talking about the trauma cured blindness. Talking about the trauma cured paralysis. So they called it a talking cure, because a miracle. And you could look it up on Google. Type in Google Arthur Hurst's Miracle Talking Cure, and you'll get an answer from Google. Google knows about the talking cure, the miracle talking cure. Arthur Hurst's Miracle Talking Cure. So besides Arthur Hurst's Miracle Talking Cure, what's important about that is it seems there was a misunderstanding, a false presentation. The assumption, reasonable assumption and theory was that it was all about talking. What they didn't know is, I mentioned Chris Voss earlier. Chris Voss proves I don't have to say anything to feel heard. My favorite example is where Chris Voss and his team did all the talking in a hostage situation, and they diffused $10 million worth of anger because the terrorists released a hostage that was worth about $10 million. So they told the terrorist everything he was angry about, and then the money was never brought up again. And a few weeks later, they found the American hostage walking down the farm road. So I don't know who else to from shell shock besides Charles Myers, Arthur Hurst. There's a few other important players. They don't come to mind right now. I'll say this about experts. There was a military officer clearly struggling with PTSD symptoms, and his doctor, different guy, also famous in the shell shock realm or World War I mental health treatment of soldiers and veterans. The doctor agreed with the patient. The doctor tried what the patient said. The military officer wanted to bury his soldiers. To put the soldiers to rest, to put his mind to rest. I mean, to me that says the officer has a degree of compassion for others. Even though he might have ordered those soldiers to their death. Seems that's something that's missing today. Maybe we should bring back the that idea in practice. Is so the doctor agreed, and the doctor had a lot of the traumatized soldiers go back to France to bury the war dead after the war, to give them a proper burial. And so I really don't remember either of their names, the officer or the doctor. And my closing point is, teaching point is, I got to go in here for a medical appointment for to get back in the military. So I'm going to close by saying Chris Voss talks about always start with the hard-hitting news and always end on a positive note. He often quotes Oprah Winfrey, and no matter how things turned out on a show, they always ended on a positive note. They always welcomed the conversation, and what the industry did with talk show hosts is they would bring them in on a limo and out on a taxi, except Oprah. Oprah would bring him in on a limo and out on a limo, always leaving the other person on a positive note. So it might sound crazy to, an example is Chris. He would write out his emails. Chris Voss, master negotiator, he would write out all his emails, and then he'd put all the, out of practice, because we've been doing this forever, always start with the good news, sandwich of bad stuff in the middle. And so what he does now, what he teaches, and I've practiced this and I find it works great, is in different ways, in conversations or otherwise, put everything at the end. So what Chris did is he'd write out his email. He would take all the good stuff, move it to the bottom. And in conversation, like with terrorists or family members, what's important is that it lands softly. So you might apologize or warn somebody before you hit them hard with the bad news. All it takes is saying, "I'm sorry," before hitting them with the bad news. And all the good things you got to say somebody in an email or in a conversation, end on a positive note. So that's how I'm going to end on a positive note, is giving you that information so that the next time you're in a conversation with somebody, I'm going to say it sounds crazy to try this stuff. I find it works every time. If it doesn't work, it's because I did or said something wrong in the wrong way. And so I just try to stay curious to find better ways. But if I failed, it's because I did something wrong. But the method works. Anyway, thanks.